Mira took a deep breath of the brisk morning air as she surveyed the small encampment around her. Tents and supply crates dotted the clearing, and the quiet murmurs of her inspection team reached her ears. Everyone was on high alert, given how close they were to the storm pack's border. The tension was tangible, almost crackling like electricity in the air. Yet Mira refused to let anyone see her worry. She was the one leading this mission. After all, she glanced over at Rex, her most trusted aide, who was going over inventory numbers with a few other wolves. He was a stout man with close-cropped hair, sharp eyes, and a fierce loyalty to her family. His gaze cut to her, and she offered him a reassuring smile. Clearly, he was worried. Ever since they arrived at the border to inspect the mineral deposits, he had been cautioning her to wrap up as soon as possible and head back. The concern was understandable, Mira, Rex said. Approaching her once, he finished his conversation with the others. We have confirmed the mineral veins. Everything is mapped out, at least on our side. But it's just as we feared. A large portion extends right into the transition zone. His face was grim as he said it. The transition zone was the area separating the Pack Alliance from Storm Pack territory. Storm Pack was notorious for its secrecy and immense strength, and the Pack stubbornly remained unaffiliated with the rest of them. At best, they coexisted in an uneasy peace. At worst, everyone knew Storm Pack could dominate if provoked. Stories circulated about how Storm Pack raided bordering packs, and rumors painted its alpha as a cold-blooded tyrant. Most of that was secondhand knowledge, but the terror in people's eyes whenever they spoke of Storm Pack suggested there was some truth to the tales. Well, Mira replied, forcing calm into her tone, at least we were able to confirm the existence and size of the deposits on our side. Sliding a hand into her jacket pocket, she touched the notes she kept there. We'll take this data back to my father and the council, so they can arrange a safe way to manage it. Rex nodded. Are we leaving soon, then? Hope flickered in his eyes. He had been on edge since they arrived the previous day. Despite the forest's outward serenity, the Storm Pack's looming presence had turned every rustling leaf into a potential threat. I think that's best, Mira said. There's no need to endanger everyone further. We have enough evidence to prove ourselves. If I push this too far, it's not doing anyone any favors. Rex placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I'm glad you understand, Mira. When I said you should prove yourself to everyone, I meant in a safe environment. It's too close to the Storm Pack for comfort. Those rumors. I know, she interjected softly. She had heard the rumors time and again. Storm Pack's warriors were said to be stronger because of their unique blood, and the Alpha was reputedly ruthless, bearing the dark moniker Tyrant, yet living in fear of an unknown threat grated on her. A part of her, perhaps a foolish part, wanted to believe that not all the rumors were true. But we're leaving now. I've seen enough. The tension in Rex's shoulders eased slightly. We'll pack up immediately. As he relayed instructions to the rest of the inspection team, Mira busied herself with final checks, marking out boundaries on the map. It was frustrating to see that the richest part of the mineral deposit straddled the border separating them from Storm Pack territory. The official line was clear, yet rumors claimed some of the deposit ran into the transition zone. A swirl of wind blew Myra's hair across her cheek as she looked toward the thick cluster of trees marking the boundary. The forest seemed peaceful, indifferent to the invisible lines drawn by werewolf politics. If only it were that simple. Her father had always emphasized that every territory and alliance existed for the survival of the packs. Another gust carried an unsettling, coppery scent. Faint but enough to make her swallow hard, she double-checked the surroundings, but everything still appeared normal. Her senses, however, remained on high alert. Brushing off her anxiety, she folded her map and walked back to camp, where Rex and several guards were loading equipment into a pair of off-road trucks. Mira, we're ready to move out, announced one of the guards, a tall, lanky man named Royce, offering her a polite nod. Great. Let's. A primal, guttural roar came from the other side of the clearing, close enough that it rattled every rib in her chest. Everyone froze, exchanging startled looks. The forest fell silent afterward, as though holding its breath. What was that? Whispered one of the scouts, Stepping forward slowly, Rex marched over to Mira in a few quick strides. Could it be Storm Pack? She shook her head. Not likely. If they were here, they wouldn't make that kind of noise. They'd be stealthy. Let's not jump to conclusions. Still, her heart hammered a frantic beat. Stay together, she ordered. Let's see if we can. A figure burst through the treeline, racing toward them at a speed that seemed impossible. Another followed, both of them werewolves in human form, yet something feral shone in their eyes. Rogues. Their savage snarls made Myra's blood run cold. Rogues rarely traveled in large groups, but when they did, they were unpredictable and vicious. There was barely time to react. One rogue lunged for a guard, who barely managed to leap aside. The second rogue slammed his claws into another guard's thigh. The guard cried out, blood spraying across the forest floor. The scene plunged into chaos. Protect the group, Rex shouted, shifting into his wolf mid-sentence. Others followed suit, clothes tearing as they transformed and launched themselves at the intruders. However, it quickly became evident these rogues were unnaturally strong. Despite the loyalty and training of the bodyguards, many were overpowered. Snarls, yelps, and the sound of flesh rending filled the air. Myra's mind snapped into survival mode. She glanced around, looking for a route to retreat to the trucks, but more rogues emerged from the undergrowth, blocking the path and pressing closer. One lunged at her, and she barely managed to duck. His claws sliced through the air mere inches from her head. A moment slower, and she would have been bleeding out on the dirt. Rex, she called, searching for him in the melee. His wolf form was locked in a vicious struggle with a rogue, jaws snapping at the attacker's shoulder. Two other rogues circled them, waiting for a chance to close in. The inspection team was outnumbered. Myra's heart pounded with a desperate realization. They had to escape. A direct fight would be their undoing. She turned and fled toward a cluster of trees, hoping to circle back and find a path for the rest of the team to escape. Someone screamed behind her, another guard down. Guilt clawed at her, but staying would only hinder the others as they fought. Her footsteps thundered against the ground. She heard growls closing in and sped up, adrenaline fueling inhuman speed. Branches snapped beneath her boots. She vaulted over fallen logs, fighting to keep her balance. Her wolf instincts nudged her to shift, but doing so without a plan would be dangerous. Better to use the forest's natural cover. A flash of movement to her right caught her eye. A rogue crashed through a tangle of vines, lips curled in a snarl, yellow eyes fixed on her. Far too close. She threw herself to the ground, rolled, and scrambled back up. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. There was no time to register fear, only to keep moving. She ran deeper into the woods, weaving between towering oaks. Twigs scratched her arms and snagged her hair. She reminded herself not to cross into the transition zone, but it was nearly impossible to retain any sense of direction in this chaos. All sense of bearing was lost in her panic and the rush of blood through her veins. Eventually, she broke free of the cluster of rogues, at least temporarily. Their howls and snarls receded behind her, though she knew they wouldn't give up easily. Her chest burned from exertion, and she finally slowed to a jog. Worry for her team flared in her thoughts. Were they safe? Did Rex manage to escape? She forced focus back to the immediate problem. She needed a vantage point to locate a route back to Pack Alliance territory. With the canopy blotting out the sky and no compass or phone, she was functionally blind. The inspection had been meant as a simple trip, not a battle. Eventually, she found a small clearing. The forest floor was coated in moss and dotted with mushrooms. At least it was a chance to catch her breath. She scanned the surroundings, hearing only distant rustles. Each direction looked identical, each cluster of trees the same. She weighed her options. Turning back without knowing where the rogues might be was suicide, but going forward felt reckless, too. She was in the midst of deciding when a sharp pain exploded in her shoulder. With a gasp, she spun to see a rogue, crouched low, teeth bared, hurtling toward her. With no time to dodge, she raised her arm in a desperate block. The rogue slammed into her at full force, driving the air from her lungs and sending her sprawling. Stars flickered behind her eyes as her skull connected with a rock. Instinct demanded she roll away, so she did, narrowly evading the rogue's snapping jaws. Pain radiated through her body, but she forced herself upright. Seeing his next lunge, she twisted aside and lashed out with a kick, connecting with his ribs. He stumbled but pressed his advantage. This time, his claws raked across her arm, drawing a pained cry from her as blood soaked her sleeve. Panting, heart crashing against her ribs, she realized she couldn't sustain this. The rogue's eyes shone with savage excitement, as though confident he had cornered his prey. Mustering the last of her strength, she circled a nearby tree to break his line of sight, then bolted. She ignored the brambles tearing at her legs and sprinted until her lungs burned at last. The rogue's snarls faded, and she couldn't tell if he'd given up or lost her. She collapsed to her knees beside a thick cluster of ferns, breath rasping in her throat. Her shoulder ached viciously, blood trickling down her arm. The sharp, metallic scent was impossible to ignore. Shudders swept through her. Exhaustion and lingering terror. Her thoughts whirled with worry for the rest of her team. Had they managed to evade the rogues? The questions churned in her mind, but she knew she had to stand up and keep moving. Staying would only increase the risk of being found by another attacker. Ironically, her intention had been to avoid Storm Pack, but she now suspected she was near their border, or worse, already over it. Her head spun with the realization that crossing into that territory could bring even greater danger. After catching her breath, she used a tree trunk for support and stood. The canopy was too thick to see the sun, and her internal compass felt scrambled. She whispered, "Okay, Mira, think. You need to move quietly. Find a clue, any clue to get back." Keeping her footsteps light, she pressed through dense vegetation, flinching at every snapped twig and rustling leaf. Her shoulders still throbbed, and shifting into wolf form was not an option. Carrying the notes and keeping enough energy to survive took priority. Time crawled in a dizzying fog of pain and tension. Each trunk of an ancient tree looked the same as the next. Occasionally, she glimpsed faint footprints in the soft earth, but they vanished or led nowhere. Memories of the ambush flashed over and over in her mind, filling her with dread. She could only hope the others had escaped. Weary and somewhat lightheaded from blood loss, she came upon a narrow path through thick brush. It looked seldom used, but it was better than aimless wandering. Securing her notes in her jacket, she followed it. The forest felt closer here, and the air carried a faint chill. Each breath felt heavy, as though charged with an ominous energy. Deep down, she suspected she was in storm-pack territory, or at least very close to it. Despite fatigue dragging at her limbs, she pushed on. Soon, she emerged into a small clearing of jagged rocks, guided by the sound of a trickling stream. Water could help her clean the wound or orient herself. She stepped toward the soothing sound when a branch snapped behind her. Her heart lurched. Scanning the vegetation, she saw nothing but sensed another presence. Slowly, she crept behind a large boulder for cover. The rustling grew louder. Every muscle tensed. Either the rogues had found her again, or something else was after her. Adrenaline lit her veins, forcing her tired body to remain alert. A closer snap. Her eyes darted to a thick patch of undergrowth. It parted slightly, revealing a massive paw, black fur, claws curved like knives. This was no ordinary rogue. She barely dared to breathe. Dread coiled in her chest. Could this be a storm-pack wolf? If so, was there any hope they might spare her, or would they see her as a trespasser? Rumors insisted storm-pack wolves were the fiercest in the region, and now she believed it. She attempted to back away quietly, but her foot slid on a loose stone. She stumbled, scraping her knee. The small noise was enough to draw attention. The rustling paused, as though the creature behind the bushes froze to confirm what it heard. Then, in a swift rush, it burst into the clearing. She only managed a glimpse: rippling muscle, midnight black fur, teeth gleaming in a silent snarl, before it launched itself. She had barely enough time to gasp before its massive weight slammed into her torso, flinging her onto the ground.